housing and the energy crisis, and then we will move to like what should be the priorities for the new Commission and Parliament in this upcoming cycle. And we will have Benedetta Scuderi, an MEP from the Greens, joining us for this discussion. So voila, this is the agenda for today. We're starting right now. We will have the keynote speech, one of the sessions, a coffee break, and then the other session. So give the floor to Kim.
Hey, hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Claes. I work as a corporate capture campaigner at Friends of the Earth, and I will try to guide you a bit in the broader European Commission agenda. I'm not an expert, of course, in all the subtopics, but it's more like trying to highlight some of the key moments and key insights of the agenda. So, maybe, the first thing I wanted to start with, like a while ago in June, if I'm not mistaken, there was like the strategic agenda announced. And this was already like a first time that it became clear that we will have like a serious shift in the narrative. So you couldn't see anymore any reference to the Green Deal, and they were talking about a free and democratic Europe, a strong and secure Europe, a prosperous and competitive Europe. And only in the details of the competitive Europe, they talked about like the success of the green and digital transition. So, and for example, the word environment was not mentioned only as business-friendly or consumer-friendly investment environment. So that said already a lot about the changing priorities. And then this was also translated later on in July when von der Leyen spoke and explained her political guideline for the next 5 years. You saw, she was talking about competitive checks. She was talking about a clean industrial deal that would be announced in the first 100 days. And they talked about like the need for lower energy bills, mainly to foster the competitiveness of Europe. So mainly for the good of the big industry in Europe. And she also talked about like a European competitiveness fund. During the hearings, some things that I wanted to highlight, we saw that there is like for the first time like a vice president for implementation, simplification, and interinstitutional relations, and a lot of commissioners. They had like different tasks. So von der Leyen asked them to, for example, to reduce corporate reporting obligations by 25% for the businesses. They are now talking, for example, on an omnibus proposal, which is like taking corrective measures on all existing EU regulations. So just to, without going too much into detail, this just to give you a bit of a glimpse what is happening and what kind of narrative there is at the moment very central in the debates. And then linking, if we're focusing a bit more on like discussions on energy and climate, I think the good thing is that von der Leyen was confirming the 90% emission reduction target for 2040. And Hoekstra also did the same, but for example, he focused in his hearing a lot that the green transition needs to be socially fair, which is something we like to hear, I think, but at the same time, it was very unclear how he would achieve these targets and what is the way forward to reach this. Jurgensen, as a new energy commissioner, he's energy and housing commissioner, and I think for today this is very important because this could be an opportunity to tackle like the housing crisis and also ensure like and link it with like an energy, a broader energy and climate policy. And also there in Jurgensen's task, it was very much like focused and highlighted that he had to assure that the energy prices are going down, which is essential to the bloc's plans to remain competitive with the United States and China. So you see, they ask for cheap energy, but it's mainly because they want to have cheap energy to be competitive with other economic blocks. in general, I think everyone knows it and have experienced this. That we see like that yeah, there is a lot of criticism on the climate policies. Some people talking about the real backlash of climate policies and so on. And yeah, there is like it seems to be like a kind of area of conflict where we at the same time we need energy transition that has to speed up. At the same time, we also see that due to the shift to the right, for example, there is a challenge to continue at the pace of the European Green Deal. So there is a huge challenge to do more, but at the same time, we see that the political environment is not getting easier to make these changes. So in general, what I mentioned a bit also is like we see like a shift from the European Green Deal to a clean industrial deal. We have seen in the last months that there was some weakening of important parts of the European Green Deal before the elections, and now we see like that. Yeah, it looks like they remove the focus of the Green Industrial Deal and the climate goals, and they will focus on a broader competitive agenda, which is yeah, based on, we have seen like that there are like two key reports published lately. You had the Letta report, who was focusing on the need for a single market, a strengthening of the single market, and the Draghi report, who focused on like the competitiveness. Both reports focusing a lot on the need for Europe to be more competitive, that the industry otherwise who will bring welfare to us will leave Europe because we have stronger economic blocs that are more competitive than us, US, China. So if we are doing nothing, then they will leave Europe, and this will, of course, create like a decline of welfare. At least that's the narrative that has been announced. No? And the clean industrial deal underlying is that we need public funds to de-risk, that's how they call it, de-risk private sector investment. So the industry needs to make investments to make the green transition possible, but that's too risky in this current economic environment. So we need public funding, a lot of public funding to make this happen, to allow our industry to help implementing the green transition. That's the narrative that we hear, and they're also calling a lot for eliminating regulatory incoherence, conflicting objectives, and unnecessary complexity. So we see like a push for, they call it simplification, but often, there is a risk for real deregulation. So it's not only about deregulation, as I said, but also on public funding of the industry, as a reaction on the subsidy schemes of the EU and China. Okay. Yeah. And at the same time, maybe, okay, I'll start here, okay. So at the same time, we see, okay, that's handy. At the same time, we see also austerity. So remember that we have like a big subsidy package promised, or that they are announcing that there will be like a lot of public funding for the industry, for the energy intensive industry. But at the same time, we are going back to, there's like the return of the austerity policies. So for example, Belgium, France, Hungary, Italy, Malta, Poland, and Slovakia will be in an excessive deficit procedure. So this will mean that they will be very limited in public spending. They will have to cut their public budgets and so on. So it will constrain member states to implement ambitious economic policies, for example, which can, of course, have like a big impact on welfare within the countries itself. And it could be a source for even more far-right rises in these countries. So just to show you a bit like at one point they're asking for billions of public funds for the energy intensive industry. At the same time, a lot of the countries will be confronted with very strict austerity policies and won't be able to invest a lot in their public services. So the competitiveness is all about simplification. It's but they call it simplification, but for example, also today, there were already a lot of articles that showed that this is a major risk, that this could translate in deregulation of essential social, environmental, climate, and democracy and human rights protections. Yeah, and often maybe interesting to see, like now we see a lot of crisis coming up, like the car industry, and directly people make the link like, okay, this is because there are too many rules and regulations for the industry, so that's way too hard for them, so that's why they have to cut their investments here in Europe and they have to go to other countries or other parts of the world. But yeah, if we look a bit closer to it, and for example in the German car industry, that there are now like companies that are shutting down is mainly, or not only of course, but mainly also the failure because of governments and corporations who have not invested and adapted to the necessary transitions. Yeah, remember for example some car companies who refused to go to electric vehicles, for example, and kept on investing in combustion engine cars. So yeah, we see like a very narrow focus, on industry competitiveness. We see a focus on decarbonization. And that's directly like a risk that for false solutions, because if decarbonization is the only guiding principle to take climate action, for example, we see like some wrong energy solutions that can only lead to prolonged fossil fuel dependency. So some of the examples, of course, are the carbon capture storage systems, where the industry says like, okay, this is what we needed, this is a way how we can reduce our carbon emissions, but at the same time, it's also locking us into like locking us in further fossil fuel dependency. And we see the narrow focus of cheap energy for the industry. It's important, I think, for this forum. I will come back to it later because, the focus and the need for cheap energy is really much focused on the industry. So they call for cheap energy because they say the industry can't compete with other economic blocks because of too expensive energy for them. Just to give you a bit of an insight on this, is not coming from nowhere. Just to let you know, like that, at least since June 2022, the industry was quite coordinated and pushed for a competitiveness agenda. They were pressuring governments and the Commission already to put deregulation and completing the single market at the heart of their agenda. And at this moment, we already see that there was some rolling back of previous commitments that were made. And I think most of you have heard of the Antwerp Declaration, but that was like one of the key moments where the industry came together directly with, at that time, Prime Minister De Croo in Belgium, together with CEFIC, which is like the Chemical Business Association, and also von der Leyen was there, and they call for, and that's maybe nice to see because you see like a almost perfect reflection in the Commission agenda at the moment. Is they called at that moment in February 2024, they called for an industrial deal, they called for a strong public funding, and they called for a new spirit of lawmaking, which includes like we should like check all the regulations and prevent over-reporting, ensure coherence, and integrate legislative proposals through a stronger Secretary General. So they wanted to really deregulate, let's say, because all these rules are making the EU industry difficult to compete. So that was a bit what was mentioned in the declaration, and some months later we have seen this appearing in the strategic agenda. Then it was mentioned in the political guidelines from von der Leyen. And at this moment we are waiting for the clean industrial deal, which is taking over exactly the narrative of the industry. So just to focus on that, and the Antwerp Declaration is largely reflecting energy intensive industries. And that's maybe, I find it interesting, maybe, is it, it's not a direct outcome of the shift to the right following the recent European elections. This was already happening way before the elections. There were already a lot of very close exchanges between the Commission, between the Council and business groups over the past 2 years. And they were very successful in pushing their agenda, and now this is appearing in all the very important policy documents that we are confronted with. And for example, also in the drafting of these key reports, the Draghi report and the Letta report, there were researches done, and they checked how many contacts there were with like the business associations, and it was clear that there were so many meetings with business associations and companies to feed into this report, while there was very limited CSO representation or input. But of course, with the current political climate, with the strengthened far right and the EPP, they will be quite ready to help and support this agenda. On fossil fuels level, we also have seen, like in the last, with fossil-free politics, the coalition I'm working for also, we have done a report and to check the amount of lobby contacts between the Commission and fossil fuel lobbyists, and we have seen that there were nearly 900 meetings between von der Leyen's Commission and fossil fuel lobbyists during this term of office in the last 4 years. So that shows like that, there was like a very close relationship, and it's only about lobby meetings. They have a lot of other tactics. There are a lot of business groups, there are advisory groups. So this is only the tip of the iceberg, let's say. And we also have seen that this interactions have been pushed a lot after the Russian invasion. So the industry was really ready to be there once there was the Russian invasion, and we wanted to get rid of the Russian gas directly. They were there, and von der Leyen has invited them to come to her office to ask, like, okay, what should we do? How can we solve the problem? And of course, fossil fuel industry has given the answer that we know at this moment. So we have, a boom in new gas infrastructure. We are at European level financing a lot of false solutions like carbon capture storage systems. There was like weakened climate action and blocking of windfall taxes during the last cost of living crisis due to heavy lobbying of the fossil fuel industry. And we have it's now under discussion, luckily, but a big amount of fossil fuel subsidies. And an industrial deal with probably increased public funding for fall solutions. So it's all clear that there are severe impacts of climate change, so we have to accelerate the transition. We have to switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. And we have the 2040 target, luckily, so that's at least like a goal we want to reach, but it's quite clear that the EU lacks vision in how to phase out fossil fuels, and as mentioned already, this opens like the risk for false solutions that are pushed by the fossil fuel industry. And to conclude, we are going, at least in the very first narrative, now it's disappearing a little bit, and made very clearly the connection between, okay, we need a clean industrial deal to implement the European Green Deal. At this moment, they are not highlighting that connection anymore that much. But so they said like, okay, we need the industry, we need more public funding for the industry to really implement the European Green Deal. So, at the same time, we know that the Clean Industrial Deal will be launched at the same time as the Commission plans of the 2040 target, but still it's very vague how this Clean Industrial Deal will support the 2040 targets, for example. So that's very unclear, and it's also worrying that in all these new documents that I mentioned, there's almost no wording about like the climate goals, how they will achieve it, fossil fuel phase out, and so on. So of course we think that the Commission must ensure like regulations that prioritize public welfare over corporate interests, because at this moment with this agenda we really get the feeling that corporate interests, that they will mobilize a lot of funds for corporate interests without having like any conditionality attached to it. So they will give like a blanco check, let's say, to the industry. So, and at the same time, another risk is that existing funds that are earmarked for climate, environment, and social investment will go to the industry. So, the most, I think, coming back to the combination of we see that the public authorities will be confronted with austerity, so they won't have like big public budgets, they will have to cut in their public budget, and at the same time we see like very corporate driven policies. We see the Clean Industrial Deal, which is like mainly reflecting the interest and the agenda of the big energy intensive industry. So the room to maneuver to find like real solutions will be limited. And yeah, the Clean Industrial Deal all started with the need for cheap energy to be competitiveness. But I think, yeah, we think that the real solution and the best way to clean and affordable energy is to scale up renewable energy production, to not invest anymore in false solutions, to have like targeted renovation of housing and to focus on energy sufficiency and efficiency. So I hope that gave you a bit of insights on what is happening on political level. Happy to take some questions if things were not clear.
Thank you very much, Kim. Yeah, Mike can see.
I wonder what you, so how I read the Draghi report is that he's comparing us a lot with China and the US and that it's become like a real competition and who's gonna win this race. But how likely do you think that Europe is still in the competition? Like, I mean, Europe is now trying to beat them at the game that they're winning already. It seems, and Europe is way behind. So I wonder, will it not all be lost if Europe tries to catch up and not tries to invent an alternative type of system to deal with the crisis of tomorrow?
Yeah, good question. Difficult also. I think the only thing that I can say is that the answer that is now proposed has a lot of risks because they are focusing their focus is very narrow on competitiveness of the industry, the energy intensive industry, and they are not reflecting on how to be like a front runner on climate or on zero energy solutions, for example, and so on. So it's more like now they see it like, the concept of competitiveness. Often they say it's like an empty box that they are filling in with like the demands of the industry. So now they see it, everything that is like fitting in the agenda of the industry is seen as like it's part of our competitiveness. Well, I think it's a broad question, but I think I think we should believe in another kind of industrial policy instead of just trying to cut all environmental climate policies and so on.
Find our competitiveness in something else than just trying to beat them at their game.
Bit of a depressing picture you paint, Kim, but it almost makes me think I'm glad the UK left the EC, because I think the rhetoric still is very much on, the political rhetoric of the new government is very much on the importance of reducing dependence on fossil fuels. But I just wondered if there was any nation states that are trying to, resist this sort of agenda and are, pointing to a more progressive approach.
Sorry, can you repeat
whether there are any particular member states that are resisting this broader agenda you're talking about within the Commission and, keeping to the sort of importance of the Green Deal and reducing dependence on fossil fuels and so on, investing in energy efficiency.
If other people also want to react, I'm not considering myself the expert in all these details, but yeah, I think it's quite early to see what the reaction will be of member states at this moment. Yeah, we are talking about the clean industrial deal. We have seen where it comes from, that it was pushed by the industry, but at this moment, we are still waiting. Now, within 100 days, von der Leyen will propose her a clean industrial deal. So, and then I think it will become more clear how member states are receiving this and how they react on it. So, yeah, at this moment, I think it's a bit difficult to know.
Okay, so we're moving on now to our next panel. So I invite the panelists to go up the stage. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here. And yeah, hi everyone. We're going to start with the first panel of the day, in which we'll be discussing targeted energy efficiency renovations for vulnerable households as a tool to act towards the intersecting crisis of affordable housing, rising energy costs, and climate change, and of course, addressing energy poverty. So we know that indecent, energy wasteful, and unsafe housing is both a direct and a structural cause of energy poverty. And right now, our buildings are gobbling up 40% of EU's energy consumption and a staggering 75% inefficient, which leaves millions of households stuck with high energy bills and millions more unable to afford the bills and to keep their homes adequately warm or cold in summer. So we know that improving energy efficiency renovations is leading to a significantly lower amount of energy needed in order to maintain decent living conditions, making it more affordable for households to meet their energy needs. So these often translate into a reduction in energy consumption and a reduction of energy bills. But as we discussed also yesterday, this in many cases also results in households being able to meet the energy needs in the first place. So we've heard that we have a new, a more dark context coming in the EU policy sphere, but also we have good news with the joint focus of the new commissioner on energy and housing. This being an opportunity to drive bold, fair. Transformation of our homes and our building environment, and as well as we also have the Fit for 55 package that needs to be implemented. That specifically with the EPBD and the Social Climate Fund that can help us direct the renovations that we need in order to address energy poverty. So anyway. We are aware that in the past a lot of these approaches that we have failed to really trigger deep renovations and really reach the people who need the most, like the people that can benefit from these renovations the most. So this has led to having a building stock that is really wasteful, is wasting a lot of energy, and the low-income families are paying the highest price of this energy wasteful building stock. So what we are going to be addressing in this panel today is how can we make sure that that these families who need it the most are actually benefiting from the renovations, and we will hear from different experts representing different target groups of like what are their projects, what are the initiatives that are being carried in the ground to make sure that the renovations are benefiting these households, and then what we will hear from the perspective of tenants in the private sector about the perspective of of low-income homeowners in the Central and Eastern and Europe, and then also from social housing providers' perspective. And then what we will do is that we will zoom out and we will discuss what is the upcoming policy that is coming and how can we make sure that this policy is implemented in a way that actually delivers this ambitious and socially just transformation of our building environment. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go, we have 10 minutes from each of our speakers, and then we will kind of have some more time to have a discussion between us, and then we will open the floor to the public if you have any questions. So let me introduce the speakers now. So we will start with Adrien Roux from Justice Ensemble. Adrien is coming from France, and he's coordinating the Tenants for Climate campaign, if that's correct. So he's part of Locators Ensemble, which is the tenants union in France. Then we have Julien Dijol. I hope, I'm sure I'm messing up with the names. I hope it's not terrible. Okay. So Julien Dijol from Housing Europe. He is head of policy and deputy secretary general at Housing Europe, which is the European Federation of Public, Cooperative and Social Housing. So in his role, he particularly ensures that there's an effective advocacy work through the relevant links that of the EU projects that Housing Europe manages. Then we have Javier Tobías from ECODES, who works at the energy and people area. ECODES is a Spanish nonprofit that promotes sustainable development and social change through initiatives focused on climate action, energy efficiency, etc. And he particularly works at both the policy level and the field projects, focusing on energy poverty, energy efficient renovations, and urban regeneration. And then we also have Zuzana with us. Zuzana is part of the Habitat for Humanity team. She's a project manager for the Empty Spaces to Homes initiative. And this project addresses housing exclusion and affordability by transforming vacant spaces into sustainable, energy-efficient homes for vulnerable groups. So this is our speakers for today, and I'm gonna give the floor to Adrien.
Thank you, Leia. So my name is Adrien. I'm a community organizer. Actually, I'm organizing tenants union in France, and now we're building a coalition in this. We believe when talking about energy in the housing sector, it's there is behind this for all the private rental sector. There's social conflict between tenants and the landlords, and the power issues about like who's gonna pay for the renovation or who's gonna pay for the lack of renovation and for the energy bills. So we've started. So how do I? Okay, yeah. Next, yeah. Yeah, please. So I'll focus on France. So when we started it in France, was really like local neighborhood level organizing effort, like door knocking, targeting neighborhood where buildings were having poor insulation in suburbs in France. First in Grenoble, that's where we started, and then in Lyon, and with really this idea that. The effort to do was like having organizer knocking on doors with person, being the ability to build this tenants assembly to define what was priority in terms of insulation, and then building like petition, having tenants' voice in this first part with social landlords, and then with the city to have more budget on insulation. Based on this model we've developed in Grenoble, we then duplicated it in other cities, mostly in northern Paris and the Lyon region, and then South Bordeaux, with this whole process where where tenants were living in poor homes, there were some voices that needed to be heard. Based on this, and especially 3 years ago when there was the new legal agenda on this issue, we built a coalition between the tenants unions that we were doing, and Greenpeace, Alternativa, and the Fondation Abbé Pierre, because some of the negotiation on the law we are not taking account the tenants' situation. And what we realized was that there was one case where we lost an arbitration where the very badly insulated homes, but with electric energy, were put out of mandatory renovation. And we had many members concerned like this, like Aline that you can see on this. And also our friend were in the lobby discussion just said like, oh, we just lost this thing, there's 300 very poorly insulated homes who are gonna be not considered. So we were able, because in one neighborhood it was a small one actually, like 70 homes, but there have been this struggle for like 1 year with like petition, assembly, there's a local rent strike in these buildings because it was poorly insulated. So we were able, Aline invited the minister to sleep in her home for one night to see what it was like, and then the media, and we have big media attention on this narrative about how there are families living in these energy leaky homes, and they need to take action about it. And maybe, and this might be a difference, we've seen it at a difference with other countries, the fact that in France, in French, actually, poorly insulated homes are labeled as a problem with energy sieves home. There's this metaphor, energy leaky homes, we could say. And so the media, you can see it like it's seen as a problem to be solved. And the one who are responsible is the owner of this energy sieves home that have been wanted. So many of these struggles that we've led were first in the public housing. We started it 10 years ago, a bit more in 2013, and now in France, and Julien, you'll tell us more about it. The rate of renovation, the ability to fund it, and the engineering for doing this, we are on a good trajectory in social housing. But so now most of the energy leaky homes that we have targeted are in the in the private rental sector, and that's where the social conflict is actually the more real. So and it was more difficult than targeting because social housing neighborhood is like big neighborhood. You could have public data on this. So we had to map it in the city to try to identify those buildings who were concerned with this in the city where we were organizing. So we using some of the data. This we've got it in France. Then we will see, but with some of our partners, we were not able to. I'll try. Maybe I'll but then same job, basically organizing. So it's like really the whole process from the mapping and door knocking to the media attention it goes through this like job now. Etienne or Maureen, who, like building after building, street by street, we knock the doors, we organize a house meeting. Then bigger assembly, neighborhood assembly. So we are able to have demands and to bring it to real estate agency and to the landlords. So sometimes it is a letter or petition are enough. Sometimes tenants would go together in the real estate agency to force the real estate agency to put the renovation at the agenda, not delaying it late. Two things that have been key to win. More than legal expert, like when we are doing some like tenants union things, there's a lot of things with rights, but legal advice or counsel were actually less important than thermal advice. We had this like coalition of volunteer engineers who were ready to help, and a bit like a doctor who give a paper saying like this is a sick home. That help us to first to push landlords to take action against this. And the second thing was to try to build some kind of joint pressure from social pressure from the tenants and public authority pressure on these leaky homes landlords, and it went to like symbolic pressure. We had elected official just informing landlords, you are in a priority zone to renovate, or some support to the tenants to help to block rent increase in leaky homes. And we realized that when we had all these ingredients together, we are able to, in quite most of the case, to have some change. So in the first experiment that we had in Grenoble, we had some 70% case, like when tenants get organized and are able to build these collective demands in a building, in 70% case, they were able to have their landlords to take the first action toward renovation. But we realized, like, more than this, like building after building things, the idea is also to have a new public narrative about this, because behind this thing is like the housing capitalism, which is behind this, with like one side is tenants who pay higher and higher rent and high energy bills, and who pay for the statu quo, for the lack of renovation. And on the other side, you've got this rich landlords. In France, there's a figure that say that 50% of the rental homes are owned by 3% of the landlords. So there's a concentration of ownership, and we should put pressure. Private property, in this case, is failing. Is producing social inequality, but also facing the climate issues. So we build it at the national level. We believe that building like a tenants federation, it's named Locataires Ensemble, tenants together. And we're building link with other groups who are doing the same thing in the UK, for example, in England or Scotland, or some groups who are launching tenants organizing in Berlin, Germany, or in Prague, Republic Czech. So in Berlin, it's called Soziale Warme Wende, and it's climate activists and housing activists who go together, target building, door knock, and build tenants groups asking renovation. In Scotland, it's a powerful tenants union. We're fighting for rent, and now which is shifting its activity more and more to fight for retrofit and insulation. And in Belgium, there's both a tenants union who was launched in Brussels, VUM, and in Wallonie, in Namur or Charleroi, Caro Locataires Ensemble, tenants together, who just add some support now to do the same organizing program as we are having in France. So the idea is to have tenants' voice in the public debate, to have we tenants, we're like 60 million of tenants living in energy leaky homes in Europe. We want to have legal protection. We believe that our landlords who make money out of things should have more obligation. And we believe it's a power issue. So like one side, the tenants union, the other side, the housing capitalists, and somehow the public authority the transition would depend not only of the political will, but of the kind of balance of power between those two groups. And we believe that's some role, because the tenants were a bit weak in the last decades, and now more and more tenants organizations are starting in Spain, in Italy, and others. So if we push hard enough, harder again, it's going to go to progressive transition, fast transformation, and then maybe the ecologist housing revolution that we badly need.
Thank you so much. We're going to hear all of our speakers, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions. So, Julien.
Well, thank you. So yes, that's perfect transition, because you've heard about the tenants. Now you will hear about the landlord, but the good ones, the social housing landlords. I'm saying the good one because, as we saw actually in our sector, in general, the energy performance is better, the resource efficiency is better, and we have a strong protection mechanism against what we call renovations. And indeed, this is I mean, we are actually in many countries driving the renovation activities, but we are a small part of the housing stock in Europe, only 11% of the total housing stock. Most of the housing actually is owned by individual homeowners, at least 70%. And then you have indeed the private rental sector, which is owned sometimes by institutional landlords. So 11%, but still actually one of the front runners in this, but still only 11%. So the big question actually at the political level or the policy level is how you reach out to the 70%, the homeowners, you know, which are actually struggling to pay for renovation. And as far as we are concerned, so the social housing sector, I wanted to show you a real example of what we mean with by energy efficiency and savings. So I took something from a French organization called APUR, Atelier de l'Urbanisme from Paris. They have measured real savings, and it's very important because very often in conferences like this one, we talk about, you know, rounded figures as if it was the reality. In fact, it's not. I mean, we need to look at the real figures. And they've done a great job in looking at what is the actual reduction of energy consumption before and after the works, the energy efficiency works. And we see this is the figure here, 28% on average. This translates into kilowatt hour per square meter and in total. And what is important is to also look at when it has been done. It's been, so they've calculated in 2022. And therefore, they have taken into account this famous 2022 year, as you remember, that was the peak of the energy prices. So that's why we did not put here in terms of euros what it means, because, okay, it can vary depending on the price, depending on the year. And of course, in 2022, that was massive increase of prices. So actually, it translated into very good level of energy reduction on the bill. But it can vary depending on the period when you do that. But so the important point here, I think, is to remember is that we are talking on average about a 30% reduction of energy consumption in the social housing sector in Paris. And that might be more or less the same in big cities in Europe. We can certainly increase more. I mean, we see great projects. We can go further than that. But on average, if you look at the building stock, this is the kind of figures that we are talking about. And some of you might think, okay, it's not a lot. But at the end of the day, this is real savings for people. So it's a couple of hundreds of euro per year for people. And that's also something that is important to bear in mind. It's not nothing, and certainly in your last graph where you were showing the slow transition versus the fast transformation, we may think, okay, that's around the slow transition, but at the end of the day, it makes a difference for people as well. So it's important to look at indeed the local aspect. So the next slide, it's something I wanted to mention, going from the average situation of a typical social housing stock in Paris into one project, which is quite exemplary, coming from a project. We are a partner in social energy, which is looking at the impact of energy communities. Because in all our conversation, as you know, there are two aspects. One is reducing demand for energy, and this is what I've shown before. The other one is producing decarbonized heat. I think it was one of the conclusions from Kim, right? You say, I mean, we need to have 100% renewable energy and a strong push in reducing demand for energy. Well, the question of addressing this notion of decarbonization of heat and energy has been addressed by some European projects looking at energy communities. Energy communities, as you know, is relatively new, and it's a great way for people to try to organize at the local level. For the social housing sector, it's a bit different because we have this unique relationship where you have one landlord and plenty, dozens, hundreds of tenants. So the capacity to organize it's a bit bigger, although it might be a bit different. In a typical energy communities, you can have private landlords, social housing tenants, so coming together with different providers. In the case of social housing, this is the next slide I wanted to show you. In the case of social housing, we have something which is, I think it's a bit simpler, which is what we call the self-consumption model of renewable energy. And I took the example from Brussels, Foyer Sud. I think some of you know that already, because it's a great example of the kind of model we would like to see almost everywhere in Europe. You have basically one social housing organization, Foyer Sud, which has decided to install PV panel on the top of the roof of their buildings, and the energy that they have produced has been either has been sold to the tenants, has been used for common areas, and the excess has been sold to the grid. And this has produced basically a reduction of the energy bills for people, both because they don't need to pay so much for the common spaces, but also on their own bill. And it's not put here, but I think, yeah, you see the difference of price between the state-subsidized energy price in Brussels, 23 cents per kilowatt hour, and the Sunsud solar energy price, which is so half of it. And so I think it's not here, but it's translated into a 15% reduction on the energy bill for people. So just by working on the energy aspect, even not looking at the reduction of energy demand, you could have an impact on the energy bills for people, which is what matters. So we can clearly see the necessary combination between both that we are trying to do in the social housing sector. I think the next slide, and I think this is the last one, is an important point that I wanted to conclude with, is this notion of co-benefits that we are often talking about when in relation to energy efficiency. And we often talk about, the great impact it will have on health and so on. But we often forget that for people, for tenants, those are not co-benefits. Actually, that's the core benefits. That's the most tangible thing. CO2 is not tangible. And actually, when a social housing organization will embark into renovation, the primary thing they will say to the tenants is not, well, it will help us save CO2 for the planet. No, it will help you save money, increase your comfort and your health. And by turning this so-called core benefits into the core benefits of what we want to target, in general, things are getting smoother in terms of convincing the socializing tenants to embark into that. The challenge, of course, in that situation is to measure those co-benefits, to measure the impact on health, on the purchasing power, and issues like that. And for this, the social housing organization are using a lot of methodology. They work with consultants to show to the public authorities the impact it has to invest in the renovation of social housing. At the end of the day, in the social housing sector, we are subsidized, we are regulated, we are dependent upon public support in whatever form. It could be subsidized loans, it could be grants, but we need this public support. This notion of attracting private investor is really far away in the social housing sector. We have not seen something like private investors willing to invest in the renovation, except with the model of what we call energy performance contracting and ESCO. In some cases, as long as the payback period is more or less below 10 years, they might be happy to come in. But in general, for structural renovation, it's much more complicated. So public support is fundamental, and it's important to convince public authorities by showing the impact on other aspects. So I think I come to unless there's another slide, can you change? Yeah, no, it's a thank you one. Well, that's good. So thank you very much, and happy to have a conversation later on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for having us here and for the introduction. So my name is Zuzana, and I'm representing Habitat for Humanity International, the organization which I believe needs probably no introduction in this room, but still, we are a non-profit international housing organization that is serving the vulnerable all over the world to access services related to housing and to really have access to decent housing. So that's us. We have area office, one of area offices in Bratislava, where I am based. And besides the fundraising focus of our work, we have also the program team, which I am part of. And in the program team, we are focusing on the awareness raising, advocacy, and implementation of various project portfolios. I could divide these into 3 focus areas, which is affordable housing. That's my specificity, where we are implementing vacant spaces to homes program. Then it is affordable housing for vulnerable groups. In this one, we are focusing mostly on Roma community and Roma minorities and access to decent housing for this community. And then it is residential energy efficiency, which is actually the topic of today. And this entails also the implementation of 2 of our projects, which I will lead you through today, which is Connect and Connectivate. So I guess that we can go to actually next slide. Okay, I cannot see much, but I would start actually with some data framework just to introduce you to the topic, where over the last decade, the house prices in Europe increased by 47%. And on the rentals, on the renting houses and apartments by 18%. Opposite to this, in Europe, we have around 30 million unoccupied homes that, for whatever reasons, are not inhabitable, either residential or commercial spaces that can be turned into decent housing. Opposed to that, around 9%, as the data show, of the population in Europe are really facing difficulties to keep their homes warm. So they don't have adequate heating. And around 15% of the European population have difficulties with technicalities such as leaking roof or rotten apartments or damp apartments, which is not only connected to housing, but also to health. Because as you know, housing is one of the primaries of social determinants of health. So the outreach of this, it's much bigger. In our project, we are focusing, no, could you go to the slide before? In our project, we are focusing on multi-apartment buildings with poor energy features, built pre-90s, which represent a large percentage of the stock. What is important here is the regional aspect, that we are working with Central Eastern Europe and with CIS, so Commonwealth, independent states, and thus mostly Balkans in our case. And I would say that this is something that distinguishes us from the rest of the Europe. Again, back to the figures, back to the numbers. In Western countries and in higher income countries, most people are renting. Data shows 30 to 40% are renting. In Eastern Europe and in Central Eastern Europe, it's quite the opposite. The heritage of the past has it that we couldn't own, and thus when things changed politically, everyone wanted to own. And so the majority of people are owning their apartment, but they are living on the edge of poverty, oftentimes. And they are living in these blocks of flats. And the aim of this project, is really to focus on this geographical area and on the tenants, owner-occupied multi-family apartment buildings. Yeah, we can go to next slide. In Hungary, Bulgaria, Ukraine, North Macedonia, and Lithuania, where the COMACT project was actually implementing. So the very aim of the project is to have high cost, high impact energy efficiency refurbishment or improvements on the building level. On the EU level, oftentimes the energy poverty is referred to the households, and the lifting out of the poverty is focused on the households. But in the context of the multifamily apartment buildings, when we are talking about households, alleviation from poverty, we really need to focus on the building level. And that's what this project introduced and focused on. Put it in a very human language, like how to make the household's energy more efficient, also for the poor homeowners who would see the benefits from the energy efficiency, and yet on the other hand would still be able to pay the monthly bills. We can go to next slide. Right, so this is the main objective as I have already introduced it. So the project is aimed for the energy poor households, where all these actors are inevitable to be the part of. It's the policy and decision makers, cities and local governments, construction energy companies, NGOs, professionals with technical skills, building managers, and financial institutions. So all these stakeholders come in the process to make this ecosystem really working. We can go to next slide. What is important here? The aim of the project is to really empower and manage well the homeowners of the buildings on the building level. And thus the project introduced this new notion of building level energy poverty and how to, I don't want to use the word fight, or how to face the reality and to make it better for the tenants on the level of the building, and then from the level of the building come down to the level of the households. So we have three dimensions or three pillars here that are interconnected and cannot be functioning one without another. And if we want to alleviate the poverty on the household level on multifamily apartment buildings in Central Eastern Europe, all these three dimensions have to be taken into account. So it's empowering and activating the communities of homeowners associations. Then it's developing and adapting financial tools and optimizing technical solutions. I will start with the technical solutions. When it comes to technical solutions, we are meaning to really do the technical refurbishments as the step number one in the building when to want to make it more energy efficient. Usually, the subsidy schemes that are there on the market are not eligible for everyone, and it interferes with the financial aspect of it. But when you want to do the technical solution and you want to do, let's say, something that is high cost and high efficient, such as insulation of the building, it doesn't make sense to do the insulation of the building when you have like very old, I don't know, pipes, or the leaky roof, or the ventilation not working, or the elevator not working, cooling system not working. So what you need to do first is to improve these technical components that doesn't have much of an impact on the energy efficiency, but are inevitable to do before you do any other work, like the insulation, and then you can do renewables. It's stepwise approach and one step at a time. So what the project did, that they worked with the certain building associations to do these technical roadmaps and thus to do the technical and energy audit of the building. And based on this, they spoke to the homeowners to find the general consensus and created this roadmap of technical solutions. I will give you example from Budapest, I believe, where in one of the neighborhoods there was this very old building built in 1899, and the toiletries and gas heating was introduced in 1960s. It was 2 stories, then it was built to 3 stories, and I think that energy consumption was more than 440 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. So it was a lot. It was like class I, like Ivan, right? So just to be on the, so that just you understand what the performance was, really very bad. What we did within the project, we created the roadmap with 2 scenarios. The first scenario was to make it a zero waste building, and thus to reach class A. But this would mean that the payback period would be 90 years, which is a lot for this type of buildings. And there was a high probability that the monthly bills for the owners would really go very high. So what we did was the more realistic scenario to, jump from performance class I to C, which meant to solve the water clogging, to change the windows, and to do the insulation with the payback period 30 years. This reached the consensus on the building level with the homeowners and the associations and the building manager. And once the subsidy is out there for them on the market, they can go on because they have a technical plan based on the audit. So that's the example of the technical pillar. The second pillar is financial pillar. It's very tricky with the subsidy from state and with the commercial loans, but usually it's like 3-level financing. The homeowner association usually have some savings from the monthly fund that those that inhabited the building pay on the monthly basis, so they have their own saving. That's the first source of financing. The second is subsidy from state. That is targeted, and the third one is from the commercial banks, from the commercial sector. This usually is like financing that really works. When the subsidy, we figured out in the project that when the subsidy from state is too high, like let's say 100%, 90%, 80%, it really distorts the market. Because when the subsidy is not in place and not eligible, people are waiting for the subsidy, for the next subsidy to come, and they are not exploring the commercial potential on the market in terms of financial interventions. So the very healthy mix is to have the subsidy from state on the level of 30% and the rest to take as a commercial loan. It's also profitable for the banks, as they figured, because it's like the commercial market intervention and then the savings. So this is how it was figured out. Again, example from Lithuania, where they in this way since 2013, really refurbished and renovated thousands of multifamily apartment buildings. It was a financial scheme from the state where they got a loan rebate, 45%. Then it was lowered to 30%. And for most vulnerables, those who were taking already social allowances from state, they offered that they can have the coverage of the cost 100%. So the most vulnerables got it financed 100%, and the rest of the tenants of the building were paying, let's say, business as usual. The third pillar is empowering and activating communities of homeowners. And this is probably the most important thing to reach the consensus on decision on the building level, because over there, the homeowners are of different, I would call it like social mix within the social stratification, which is a good thing, it's a natural thing. But sometimes it's very difficult to reach the consensus of those who are really on the edge of poverty. And over there, the subsidy from state is necessary just to, push things through so that they are provided either the subsidy of 100% or they are provided, let's say, the heating compensation for heating if they choose to join the program of, let's say, insulating the buildings. Next slide. So this is why this approach is operational. Again, 3 pillars: capacity to pay, capacity to organize, and capacity to implement. And the main message is that energy poverty buildings cannot be renovated unless all 3 aspects are handled properly. And that's financial pillar, technical pillar, and community-based pillar. Next slide. These are the recommendations. To renovate multifamily apartment buildings, innovation is needed regarding technical solutions, financial tools that need to be targeted, and community activation. What this generally means: handling structural and energy efficiency interventions in one framework, extending spatial dimensions of intervention considering neighborhood structures, supporting complex financial schemes, and creating complex technical assistance. Next slide, please. Next slide. And here we come to the project ComActivate, which is actually the successor of the ComAct project. 1 more minute and I'm done then. It's actually the successor of ComAct, where we were solving only the energy poverty on the building level. Here in ComActivate, we are focusing on energy poverty, on involving the entire communities via the creation of so-called one-stop shops or resource centers that are established by the municipality and are meant for stakeholders, especially like homeowners, building managers, and also for financial institutions to find all of the information and assistance when they want to refurbish their buildings. So it's the step number 2. The spatial aspect is what I would highlight over there, because many things such as like the heating system, it comes from the municipal whatever heating. Yeah, and so we want to also entail this in the project, like to go more from the building itself to the spatial and the neighborhood approach. Because once your building is, let's say, renovated, you want to introduce renewables, then it's great if you cooperate within the greater community of your neighborhood. And yeah, I guess we can go to next slide. Yeah, this is just an institutionalization of resource centers. Next slide. And resource centers support services. I mean, it's something that we introduced recently. I'm finishing. It's something that we introduced recently, so we will see how it will work, what will be the benefits, what will be the barriers, and how can we manage so that the resource centers could be actually spread out as the concept. We are piloting them in Hungary, Lithuania, and I forgot the 3rd country, but anyway, next slide, and I believe that would be it. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Zuzana, and thanks, Julien, also.
Hello. I'm waiting for the presentation. Would you rather have me doing a gesture for the next slide, or just say next slide? Like that, something like this? Okay, perfect. So thanks for being here. I'm going to try to be very quick because I think that the best part of this is having us listen to you. Well, so and so, depending on what you say. So I'm going to present a report that we did between ECODES and Can Europe, which was coordinated by them and was co-written by both of us. This first slide is just sort of what Luis already presented, but without all of the text, just saying how many plans the Fit for 55 package had and how many of them actually cover the topics that we are discussing right now. The report mainly covers the national building renovation plans and the social climate plans and how both of them can converge, but we have to keep in mind everything else, the ED, the PBD, the RED, even I'm always writing the new European Bauhaus. I don't know really why, but I see a lot of MEPs talk about it, so I guess that it has to work for something about that. Then you can see, well, maybe you can read that there are actually a lot of stuff in both plans that sort of converge in a way, not fully, but sort of converge. There is a lot of talking about energy poverty in both of them, and then each one of them starts introducing elements that are interesting. How are we going to, or where do people in energy poverty live? In worst performing buildings. So the national building renovation plans talk about worst performing buildings, social climate plans don't. What is very linked to energy poverty, as yesterday's table or session on the feminization of energy poverty talked about? Gender inequality. Well, social climate plans talk about gender inequality, national building renovation plans don't. So how good would it be to have the best of both in one single document? So first of all, public consultations. Kim talked about the 900 lobby meetings that fossil fuel companies had with von der Leyen's Commission. Public consultations are our opportunity to have a say in these processes. We want to make these public consultations open. We want to make these public consultations transparent, because what we're saying is good. What these lobbies are saying is probably not so good. So we want to make these public consultations as open as possible and have everybody come to the table. We want to have the people that are already mentioned in both plans, local and regional authorities, other partners, but also youth organizations, which are only mentioned in one of them, or relevant civil society organizations, which are also only mentioned in one of them, tenants, which are not mentioned in either of them, but I think should be also part of this decision process, and how we can make both public consultations converge, at least when we're talking about all of this stuff. There is a lot of things that maybe are not converging, but we should talk about it. Sorry, this was a mistake because I was trying to point, but sorry, my bad. These public consultations are going to have to cover a lot of stuff, but at least in this part, they should actually converge actively, maybe even being the same sessions. Then other aspects, Julien talked about making co-benefits into core benefits. Both plans bring to the table different topics, different definitions that should be included. The energy poverty reduction, the consumption reduction. Ideally, we could talk about demand reduction, but let's keep it how it is for now, which are going to be the organizations responsible for everything. So all of this is great, but then there are many other things that are missing. Again, gender inequality, geographic specificities, worst performing buildings, indoor air quality. We want all of it in both plans. So we want these things to converge, to make more co-benefits become core benefits of both plans. And because if we have different sort of indicators and different sort of definitions, then we have different programs, which is hell. How many of you have ever applied for a renovation program? None of us, because it's hell. So let's at least try to keep it to one hell and not three different hells in which you have to present first the pink paper, then the yellow paper, then the orange paper. For one of them, you have to be energy poor, but then for the other one, you have to be disabled, and then for the other one, no. We need just one renovation program that is coherent, that probably is income driven, so we don't have this issue of being disincentivizing, and we can manage to have vulnerable households being fully covered, and then giving some benefits for people as their rent goes up, as their income goes up, or whatever. Let's explore the communication, and then let's exploit the communication as better as possible and have just one advertisement, but that you can see everywhere, instead of having X amount of advertisements for X amount of programs. anyway, renovation programs are never advertised, so doesn't matter. Let's get more money. We could talk about the fact that the participation part was the community pillar that Zuzana was talking about. We need the financial pillar. We are talking about trying to make the renovation wave and the energy transition itself fair. And what do we understand by fair? Do we understand that fair is just compensating enough vulnerable households that if we're messing their lives up X, then we will be paying them X? Or are we understanding that we are going from an unequal situation in which people are quite more messed up than other people, and that society is messing up some people much more, and that we should use these programs as a leverage to compensate and actually balance for good this situation? When you bring this up, all the different ministries, all the different DGs, whoever, just send the ball to the next player. They all have balls and they can all be playing them. And this is the ball that building renovation ministries or building renovation directives or building renovation working groups have, and they should be using it. And to do so, they need more money. So if you bring both plans together, it is easier for you to apply for additional EU funding, additional national funding, etc., etc. We need more money. Then how do you make all of this that comes from the EU level and that is going to be transposed at a national level work from the local level towards, or from the local going up? We work a lot with colleagues from Julien, from Housing Association that work at a local level in the municipalities, and they know what to do. They are the people doing the renovations. They are the people developing these best cases that we all hear about and love. So let's try to make them be heard, and let's try to make their voice be heard and applied in these programs. If we didn't manage to do it as good as we could in the EPBD process, let's try to do it in a common national building renovation plans and social climate plan process. Let's foster district renovations. We know that some areas of our cities, towns, and villages are much worse than others. It makes no sense trying to distribute incentives and subsidies like if you're just planting grain in a field. We know that some places are much messed up. Here, what we're seeing is in red areas where homes have a high energy demand, so low energy efficiency and low rents. In yellow, you can see high energy demand, so low energy efficiency and high rent. And then in green, low energy demand and high income, in Madrid. So there are different profiles. Some people need incentives, some people have the money to renovate but are not renovating. How do we do that? More on the next slide. And then some people don't even need renovation. How do we make people who already have the money to renovate so that there is more money for these vulnerable households that this plan should tackle? Just implementing minimum energy performance standards in the renovation sector. It's not so difficult, it's just 8 words. So if these plans work together, maybe this thing that was messed up during the EPBD negotiation can be brought back, and we can actually renovate our homes and make people that have the money, have the landlords that have the money, renovate their home as they already did in France, and we should all be doing throughout Europe. I tried to keep it a bit short, but in the end it was already also the 10 minutes. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a very comprehensive panel. I love this ending, so energetic ending of Javier also. So now I'm gonna give the floor to the audience to ask questions to our panelists.
Probably, I think, is it Julien? No, Adrien. Private tenants campaigns for improved standards. How do you avoid the risk of landlords putting up the rent in response to? How do you avoid when you've had private tenant campaigns to renovate the homes, how do you avoid the risk of the landlord putting the rent up after making the renovation?
So in this sector, So in the social housing sector, so you have rules regarding renovation. When in some countries, you need to ask for the let's say the support or the permission from the landlords from the tenants when the renovation will lead to an increase of rent. This is the case, for instance, in Austria. We have examples in Austria where actually they basically say to the tenants, well, we're going to do a renovation, but this will mean for you an increase of, let's say, €1 per square meter per year on your rent. Do you agree or not? And I think in the case of Austria, this has to be, it's not a simple majority, it has to be really like a qualified majority, 75%. So this happens also in Sweden when renovation is carried out. When the rent will increase, they will need to ask the tenant. In other countries, they don't ask for the permission because they basically take the assumption that at the end, the energy bills for people will be lower, and in case of an increase of rent, there will be, globally speaking, the cost of living will remain the same. And you also have countries where they have to do the renovation, but they are not allowed to increase the rent after renovation. In this case, you don't need to ask anything to the tenants. But this is a problem. This is the situation where you are forced to do renovation as a social housing landlord, and you are not allowed to increase the rent. By nature, it will decrease your amount of own capital, your own funds, something that you will be able to mobilize in the case of renovation of any investment. So some of the most advanced countries in terms of renovation are the countries where the model of financing social housing in general is already well developed. I mentioned Austria, Denmark. In Austria, basically by law, they have to make sure that the rent is equal to the costs of construction or renovation. It's an obligation. They are not allowed to do any, making any deficit on every unit. So this allows for what we call cost rental housing scheme, and this allows for actually enough own capital, own funds, so that they can really see the future in terms of any kind of investment they need. So this is a tricky question, because indeed you need in some way the contribution of tenants in one way or another. But as compared to the private sector, this is nothing like a renovation. There's nothing like a renovation in our sector. Rent may increase indeed, but this is important because it really creates a kind of autonomy and a sustainable movement towards decarbonization.
I was also wondering if the first speaker, whether that's happened after campaigns.
In our case, I mentioned it briefly. The two dimensions first. We realized in our expense that when the initiative for the renovation come from the landlords, we had like 80% case of rent increase, while when it was initiative of the tenants, and it went to a process of collective bargaining somehow, then in only like 80 or 35% we had a rent increase. So. And the main difference was like, is it like a unilateral decision, or it goes through collective bargaining, and that's what we believe, like what we in the general fight, tenants fight for this renovation. The three axes of the campaigns, like tenants' power and role and voice in the decision-making process, which is legally usually not required. Tenants' power, tenants' rights against renovation, and tenants' money, which is like not to be used for this. And then what's decisive this in France is when we got the public authority involved, the fact that public money is used for the renovation limit or really limit the possibility to increase the rent. So that's why to have it, to limit and to keep it fair and just, we need this power and then involvement of the public authority or the public money for this.
Thanks very much. Colin Roach from Friends of the Earth Europe. Thanks everybody for extremely rich presentations. I think we could be here all day talking about your contributions. But maybe two questions to Julien, if that's okay. I wonder, Julien, could you tell us a little about how much progress we're making in the social housing sector on renovations? Where do you think we are on getting to the full renovation of the sector? And if you had one key intervention you could make to speed up that process, what would it be?
So in terms of progress, first of all, I just want to refer to the general picture about the building stock in Europe. You may have heard about the BPIE building climate tracker or climate building tracker that has been published last week. Basically, it's telling us that we are very far from the target in terms of energy consumption, CO2, and investment. In our sector, as I mentioned before, we are on average we have a better energy performance. We have a higher renovation rate, which is about 1.2% on average, as compared to below 1% on average in the building sector. However, what we are seeing since 2020 is, if not a decrease, at least flattening of the renovation effort in many countries. If I take the example of France, over the last 3 years, there was a decrease of the number of social housing units that has been refurbished, whether it's a deep renovation or not. This is, and if I take the example of Austria, which I mentioned before, which I think is a great model, there's actually the same number, or more or less the same number of units refurbished every year over the last 3 years. So we are not seeing an increase of renovation rates. We are not seeing the renovation wave that actually the European Commission was calling for. This has many explanations. To put it in a nutshell, two big explanations, two factors is on the one hand, the cost of construction, cost of renovation, cost of material. We are still 20% more or less higher than 2019. And on the other side of the conversation, the cost of capital that has increased massively in countries where social housing is also looking at subsidized loans. Even in the case of subsidized loans, the interest rate has increased. So this is a perfect combination, unfortunately, the perfect or the worst combination possible, which will explain some of the headwinds that we are seeing at the moment in terms of renovation, the renovation wave in the sector. So what can we do to change that? Well, indeed, we need to work on the component I mentioned. We need to work on the cost of renovation, cost of material first, and for this, we need scale. We need scale in the form of, as we always been saying, but now very concretely, a way to aggregate projects so that actually the supply chain can provide you with a cheaper, and as much as they can, cheaper products. And we see projects in France where actually social housing organizations trying to team up, to bundle, creating what we call central purchasing bodies, collective buying scheme, and then they can go to the market and to contractors and say, look, we offer you in a way not a renovation of 10 units, but of almost 1,000 units. It can play a role, and hopefully it will play a role on the price. The other thing we can work on is on the question of the cost of capital. some of the aspects are out of our hands, of course. This is the ECB, interest rate, and so on. But, I mean, the question is also about the public sphere, the public money that can be invested in. As I think Kim mentioned, the conundrum we are facing now, that some member states will have to reduce public spending because of their situation. And yet, these are the countries where actually we need to renovate. Poland, France, Italy are among those countries. So at some point, we need to find a way, whether it's at the EU level and trying to, create another recovery and resilience facility, next generation 2.0, whatever it's called. But we need to find a way for those countries to have some fiscal space to invest. When I say that, I know it can be very unrealistic in the long term, but I can only say that this is for me the two main things we need to work: cost of capital and cost of material.
Yes, thanks so much. So I actually have two questions, if I may. I hope I'm not abusing of the microphone too much. I have one for Zuzana and one from Javier. So I enjoyed very much the presentation of the Comactivate project. I think it's great, especially like talking about, the optimization of the existing stock, trying to look at the empty spaces, like how to, make use of them the best ways possible. I wanted to ask if you have, let's say, like three key asks that we can, like the civil society working both at national and EU level can really, embed in our work and really like push forward, especially in a new, let's say, era of a new portfolio that looks into energy and housing and where constructions, it's very much like pushed forward. So like constructing more instead of like looking into what we have already standing. And then for Javier, I mean, as we work together on the report, I mean, majority of credit goes to you because you did an amazing job. I wanted to ask you, so what's the role of, civil society, NGO, especially at national level, because now the PBD implementation is like, at member state level. What can we all do to really push, the ministries to do a good job in terms of plans, in terms of interlinking the plans, and also taking a look, especially at the public consultation, which is a point that is very dear to our hearts. Thanks a lot.
Yes, indeed, you are very right. I mean, we believe that the future to go is really to do the reconstruction rather than build anew, especially from the point of view of decarbonization of the buildings, because the carbon budgets for Europe are not endless and we'll have to deal with it at some point. So from this perspective, we are really the advocates for reconstructing in many cases rather than building anew. And the numbers show it very precisely that we have many unoccupied commercial, residential, whatever, publicly, privately owned apartments and buildings that are unoccupied and are going decayed. And there is really a potential on the market. And currently we are really doing this project, Empty Spaces to Homes, where we are proving the concept of a reconstruction. But on a national level, I mean, it's quite tricky because, yes, on a national level, definitely for the targeted subsidies on this, but it's a city policy level because when it comes to housing and working not only with housing as a building, but also with those who will reside over there, it's a city level policy. So we are doing this project to prove the concept and we are focusing on three pillars over there yet again. And that's the social pillar, for whom that would be meant. Then it's financial pillar, what financial models are out there on the market, and how to create this healthy mixture of financing and spaces to homes. And the third one is environmental aspect, like the decarbonization of the buildings, taking into account not only operational carbon, but also embodied carbon, which is like the theme of its own. And we are creating the full methodology on this, on the embodied carbon measurement in the reconstruction.
Hello. Thank you, Eva, for the question. I'm going to end with a public consultation because I think that CSOs can have a role in everything I talked about. We can help with the communication of the programs. We have capillarity at the local level. We can do that. We can help with the definitions and the indicators. Hell, at least in Spain, we were the first people to publish something on transport poverty. They don't have a definition. They don't know where the wind is hitting them from. So we can help them with that. We don't have all the knowledge, but we have some knowledge and maybe some that they don't have. We can help with one-stop shops. There are many CSOs organizations that carry out one-stop shops, and maybe we are well suited, not better suited, I don't know, but to do specifically one-stop shop work aiming at vulnerable households. So I think that we have a lot of work to do, planning and detecting worst performing areas. I think that we can also have a say working from the local level with other administrations at the local level. And then what can we do regarding public consultations? I can say what we are doing in Spain, which is grabbing them by the shirt and actually launching ourselves the public consultation, organizing a whole event in which you bring 30 CSO organizations, then you call the ministry and say, we are organizing this public consultation session. Do you want to come? And then they do come, because if not, I don't know, at least it would look ugly. So we did that. And then it also gives, I think that for the whole public consultation process, it gives a very, very important advantage, which is that it is not a public consultation that is led by the administration. The administration is another stakeholder that's taking part in the consultation. So towards Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation, this is a very, very old document from '68, but still hasn't been applied. We're going further from information and consultation tokenism, and we're actually reaching co-creation and even in some cases like civil leadership almost. So we think that it's not only important because you start you get the ball rolling, which in many member states hasn't yet, and we only have 7 months for the social climate plans, but you also, I think, make a more horizontal participation process, which should be better.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we ran out of time for questions, but we're going to the coffee break. So if you have any question, please stay for the coffee so they can ask you more questions. I just want to say many, many thanks for all your great and insightful presentations. And yeah, I hope we can keep discussing in the coffee break. And yeah, thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. So before I start the panel, I actually have an announcement from the organizers, which is after this session, this panel ends, please stick around because we want to take a group picture afterwards. I will try to remind you again in the end of the session, but do please stick around for that. And now, without further ado, let's start our last panel for today. Here in this amazing place. So my name is Maria. I am a campaigner at Friends of the Earth Europe. I campaign on climate and energy justice. And today I will be joined by these 3 amazing speakers where we will explore the how to shape the EU's energy poverty strategy. And before I introduce our speakers, let me just give you a little bit of an overview of what we will be doing. In the session before, we zoomed in a little bit more on the concrete things happening on the ground, and then in the end, Javier did a little bit of a zoom out, and we'll continue in this wave of zooming out, and we'll focus more now on the EU level. And I don't know if you were here yesterday, there was a great session on the implementation of the Green Deal and all of these policies and all of the work that we need to do still. So if you weren't able to be at the session, please go watch the recording because it's online. But today, we want to kind of continue this wave of the EU level because we had very good progresses on a policy level with the European Green Deal, but of course it wasn't perfect. And I just want to shout out a little bit the work that the Right to Energy Coalition did and how their demands were reflected in the last mandate. The electricity market design introduced a ban on disconnections, which obliges the member states to ensure that vulnerable customers affected by energy poverty are fully protected from electricity disconnections, We all know it's not a perfect ban, but it is a first start, and it still doesn't really address the unsustainable debt that some of these energy poverty and energy consumers accrue. We also saw a lot of new measures that were aimed at enabling energy-poor households to benefit from renovations, but there's still a very, very urgent matter to address, which is the issue of renovations. And we also saw some funding in there, namely the social climate fund, but there's still a lot of work in terms of bridging all of these funding needs and actually targeting the most vulnerable and the most in need. So this is a little bit of what we saw reflected in the last policy package. Now begs the question, what's next? What's next that we need to do at the EU level to address the gaps and the failings of these packages? But before that, sorry, I didn't. Okay, so we know that the Commission has a mandate, a specific mandate to tackle energy poverty in the next cycle. It's reflected in a lot of the communications that we heard so far, in the mission letters, in the written questions, in the hearings. So that is already a good sign. And we also heard a lot of new packages that are coming in the future, namely the Citizens' Energy Package, which the Commission wants it to be a vehicle to enable people to participate in the energy transition and has this focus on energy poverty. What this package brings is still not sure. Still not sure what it's going to bring, but we know that, for example, energy communities will be a big pillar on this package. We know that there's going to be this dimension on energy poverty, but specifically, we still are eager to hear what's coming. We know that there's going to be the European Affordable Housing Plan, which we talked a little bit before. It's looking specifically on the high prices of housing, but we also know that from some interventions from the new Commissioner for Housing and Energy that the Affordable Housing Plan also wants to address the building renovations in the renovation wave, to tackle the root causes of energy poverty and lower energy bills. So, and we know this plan is also going to have a little bit of a link with, or maybe a lot of link to the target funds to support energy efficiency in renovation measures. And last but not least, the action plan for affordable energy prices. So if you are as confused as I am with all of these announcements, you're not alone. So with this session, we are going to try to bridge a little bit these gaps and connect the dots to see what we still need to do and what we need the European Commission to address in the next mandate. And we're also going to hear a little bit from our other co-legislator, what is the role of these institutions in shaping this energy poverty strategy to ensure that most vulnerable, that the people actually benefit from the affordable housing, that their house, that they have habitable conditions to live in. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers today. So here in my left, I have with me Benedetta Scudera, who is an Italian member of the European Parliament from Alleanza Verde e Sinistra, part of the European Greens group in the Parliament. She is a full member of the E3 Committee and the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, as well as a substitute member of the Employment and Social Affairs and the Culture and Education Committees. Then we have Eva Bardinelli, who works on buildings, works as a buildings policy coordinator at Climate Action Europe. Eva coordinates the work of the network as regards to the decarbonization of the building stock in the EU, and her advocacy work aims to make EU buildings policies fit to achieve the Paris Agreement's targets of 1.5 degree, while being socially just and inclusive. And finally, we have Anna Sofia Payomi, sorry if I'm butchering any name, from the European Federation of National Organizations working with homeless, FIANSA, and she is the Energy Poverty Policy Officer working for a socially fair energy transition. So we're going to hear an intervention of 10 minutes from each of our speakers, then we will have time later for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions in the meantime, write them down and you'll be able to ask our speakers. But I will give you the word first, Benedetta, if you want to start your introduction, if that's okay. And so basically what I would like to ask you is how did your group in the committees receive these new announcements from the Commission, and what do you foresee as to be the role of the Parliament in delivering those plans?
Thank you so Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much. For us, these plans, how we received them? We received them very positively because we've been fighting for this for a long time now as a group in the European Parliament on both sides for the Energy Citizens package, but we've been fighting for supporting like more energy to people kind of aspects and initiatives. We've been the ones really fighting for having like easing of renewable energy and renewable energy communities to, especially renewable energy communities, to implement them much more easily in member states. So, of course, this package was very well seen from and perceived and received from the Greens. On the affordable housing one is the same, as my colleague Kim Claes that in last mandate has been fighting so much on the housing issue, and to be not humble, she was really the one taking it to the Parliament, asking the European Parliament to do something about it. Then these luckily was like spread, and there's other groups, other MEPs that joined, and they joined the fight. And that's why we are talking now about housing in the European Union, because before that we were like, oh no, that's not competence. But there was a bunch of people being like, no, now you get the competence because we need to talk about it because there's a crisis. So on both sides, we've been very active, and we were waiting for this kind of initiatives. So how do we think they should look like, and what should be the role of the Parliament? On how they should look like, they should be really citizens and people-oriented, modern citizens. Like they should be for the people and of the people, not just as a slogan, but as a thing. So when we talk about energy, we need to make it as easy as possible to access energy and to make it energy democratic. And I know this is like going against some interests of big energy companies, but that is the only way to develop a fair system, but also to develop a system. Let's look what is happening with a lot of renewable energies projects that have been stopped by people that don't want them because they are just imposed from above. If you have this kind of approach, an energy citizen approach, people will feel that those plans are their plans because that's the way. And they will want more and more because they will also see the benefit in their approach to energy, the benefit in their pocket, because there will be a drastic reduction for these people of energy prices that at the moment really like imposing a huge weight on our people. That's when we talk about energy prices, we need to understand that the rise of energy prices, yes, is bad for our competitiveness, but it's also bad for our energy poverty that is simply increasing more and more. We had in the Parliament a debate on energy poverty, and we all agreed that data is telling us that almost 50 million people are now in extreme energy poverty conditions, that they cannot heat their homes. Some of them cannot even cook. And that's how important it is to tackle the energy prices. And citizen energy, this kind of approach is one of the best approaches to tackle it. Because first, you will have a direct benefit. Second, you will become part of that democratic process deciding for energy. And you will also be sensitized, like aware of what means the energy transition, what kind of benefits can bring, but also what means to be a responsible citizens, because that's also what renewable energy communities are telling us. So it's bringing people in the transition, it's taking them with us in the transition, and that's what we need at the moment. We see that there's a huge opposition from all over the place to the energy transition, to the green transition. And that is because this is the transition that we've been witnessing right now is a top-down transition, where they are like, oh, we give you this target, and then whatever happens, we don't care. We don't give you investments, we don't give you money, we don't tell you what to do, or maybe when we tell you what to do, it's super top-down, and that's it. And that's not how you bring people in. People will oppose to this, because first, they will be forced to do something, they will not understand the benefit, and they will not even perceive the benefit straight away. So this is something that it would be extremely important to do to boost the transition, to get people with the transition, but also, as I said, to share, to spread the benefit of the transition. And on the affordable housing plan, I think first the two things will probably and can probably be very connected, because for me, in the affordable housing, there will be also like something about efficiency, and there will also be something about energy citizens, because that is connected, that is very much connected, for example, to renewable energy community, can be connected to that, can be connected to common producing and sharing of energy. And that's why we took positively the fact that we have one commissioner, one for housing and for energy, because we do see that strong connection among the two things. But of course, about housing, there's much more. There's not just energy, there's housing prices. And for us, the priorities are, of course, the whole fight towards short rental. That's extremely important, but let's be clear, that is not the main issue. We know that is a huge issue. We know it's impacting a lot of places, and it's something that we need to tackle, we want to tackle, and it's already being tackled on the European level. We need to go forward on that. We need to follow through on that, but we also need to tackle other issues. And one of the main one is the financialization of the housing. We have housing now that, as the price of housing is going so up, housing are becoming a very, very important asset, and they're being financialized. That means that they've been used as, you would use stock, basically. They've been used as an asset, and they've been used to make money and not as a human right. Housing for us should be tackled, should be addressed as a human right, because housing is a human right. We know it. You need a shelter to protect yourself from whatever happens outside, but you also need a house for work, because if you don't have a permanent housing, you cannot have a job many times. You need a house to raise your kids. You need a house to do whatever you need to do. So house is a primary right, is a primary human right, and we need to tackle it as that. And that's why one of our priority on the European level would be to fight financialization of housing, to also lower the pricing, the housing prices. And then, of course, that's for us. We also asked this at the Jorgensen, at the Commissioner Jorgensen hearing. We want to see an initiative for efficient housing. So we understand, as I tackled the energy poverty earlier, we understand that at the moment we have huge issues with energy prices, but we also have a huge issue with a lot of houses that are incredibly inefficient. I come from a country where 80% of our housing is below the E level. So that means that 80% of our population, or like Italian population, is living in an extremely inefficient housing, which means a lot, the very high prices, but also very high emissions that are impacting not just on climate, but also on our cities. And this is something that we need to address. And to do this, we cannot leave anyone behind, as we love to say. So we need to put money. That's why we asked the Commissioner Jorgensen for direct investment in housing efficiency for the community that are in a condition of deep vulnerability. But we also asked for like an European guarantee loan, for example, for all that middle class that cannot afford to renovate their housing because they don't have a disposable income, but they could access to a loan, but they cannot because they don't have a guarantee. And that guarantee can be the EU with very low interest rate. And in that way, with a very small money every month and low interest rate, you can renovate your house and you will have a huge benefit on energy pricing. This is the kind of approach that we would like to see in this two package. And to conclude, the approach is to make them really for the people and not for the profit or industry or so on and so forth.
Thank you so much, Benedetta. Yeah. very passionate intervention, which we all appreciate. I just wanted to highlight something that you said, which is like these packages need to be people-oriented, not citizen-oriented, because when we talk about the most vulnerable and marginalized, we don't think about the migrants who are not recognized as citizens at the eyes of the national law. So there is a fringe of population that also needs to be considered in this package, and the word people rather than citizens kind of alludes to that fact. So I also really wanted to highlight that, and thank you for giving us a little bit of a picture of what happened behind the scenes in the parliament, that you guys have a lot of power because you have a more direct point of connection with the commission and who brings these packages forward. So it's really inspiring to hear the work of your colleague in actually putting the housing here in the forefront of the issues as a crisis as it is. So thank you so much. So next I will move on to Anna for your intervention. So please, we hear a little bit of the co-legislation, so let's hear about the people who are working on the policy aspect and worked a lot in the packages in the last mandate. So let's see, what would you like to see now, and how do you bridge all of these gaps?
Thank you so much for the question. I think there are still very important gaps in the implementation of the very ambitious packages. And it was really great to see that even if at a slow phase, but vulnerable communities and energy poverty became acknowledged in these directives, but we are still far from making sure that in the implementation their interest will be taken fully into consideration. And I think the biggest gap that we are facing currently is the investment gap. The European Commission estimates an annual investment gap for building retrofitting of 135 billion. And if we only focus on the worst performing stock, where most of energy poor households and vulnerable populations are living, probably this amount is it's like maybe half of it, but not dramatically lower, because also renovating the worst performing buildings costs more at the investment stage, because often these buildings are not only energy inefficient, having a G or F rating, but they also have other deficiencies like leaking roofs, cracks, or inefficient or obsolete electrical installations. 15% of the EU population is living in a home with a leaking roof or damp or rot in their dwellings, which is an issue to be tackled first, because we cannot insulate a home without first fixing these structural deficiencies, which need a parallel support system, which would enable them to work on energy efficiency. And going back to the financial needs, even if there are few countries where already they recognize that low-income households need higher share of upfront cost coverage, still in France, which is one of the most ambitious countries in this place, there is around 20-30% of own share left to these households that might be covered by the local municipality, but might be not. And it also makes the process more complex, as you need to apply to multiple places. And I've been just last week at the National Conference of the Housing Agency in France, which was very impressive because they have a really robust framework to facilitate renovations, not only in cities, but also in rural areas. And still in this very ambitious framework, some low-income households, if they want to do a full deep retrofit, they need to invest a few 10,000 euros in addition to the subsidies, which is impossible. It can go up to 1 yearly income of a breadwinner. And so we need to overcome this own share coverage first. So we need 100% coverage for the energy retrofitting. We need financial frameworks to fix the structural deficiencies. And I think that if it sounds scary for us, like, oh my God, it will cost a hell lot of money to cover these immense prices. We also know that the investment in this segment of the buildings is the best public investment in terms of housing because it provides quickest returns compared to investment in middle and upper income groups, because people in these homes are getting sick, their kids cannot go to school because they are sick throughout the entire winter, and only by looking at medical costs, fixing structural deficiencies and energy efficiency is returning in 1.5 years, according to the estimation of Eurofund. And if we think of investment, I think there is no better investment or quickest investment than this. So we shouldn't be lazy on rethinking how we finance energy efficiency. And as Benedetta already said, we also need to finance in other way the rest of the population who is bankable, and there the private finance needs to play its role, and the state should invest a minimum level, but only to just make the private funding accessible, and we shouldn't spend generous public subsidies on families that do not need it necessarily. And also another gap is maybe the support for families, not in financial terms, but in practical assistance. We also see in the development of one-stop shops, which is excellent, but often these are targeted with their services to middle and upper income families, and they do not have solutions for the complexity of extreme poverty or just poverty, which is the reality of many households, for example, in rural circumstances, and they do not have debt management skills, or they don't have skills to facilitate the process of solving administrative hurdles of these families in accessing finances. So we also need to make sure that in one-stop shops there are actors that have also social workers skills, not only financial and technical skills. I think also we need to take into consideration that there are different realities. There are urban realities where maybe renovations are accessible, incomes are higher, and there we need to fix the issue of multi-apartment building renovations, and we need to protect vulnerable tenants and people that might lose their opportunity to stay in the city because unfortunately currently with the financialization of housing, also energy efficiency brings up the price of homes, and we shouldn't allow that the gap that is already existing of easily accessible, cheap, but inefficient homes that are long-term expensive to manage will remain the only remedy for the housing issues of the poor, while the very expensively accessible but highly energy efficient and in the long term cheaply manageable homes will be the solution for the middle and upper income families. And I think this inequality should be taken really seriously into consideration when we are looking into the affordable housing and the affordable energy price plan. And just going back to financing, we really need to make sure that EU funding sets an example to member states by ring fencing a significant share of it for the renovation of the homes of the poorest households and the least performing homes, because until we do not ring fence, we won't be able to cover the financing gap that I was explaining, because it's so much easier to renovate the homes of middle income families because short-term gains are there, but we need to look into middle and long-term gains as well and to social equality. So I don't know where I am in time, but
You still have 2 minutes.
okay, then if I still have 2 minutes, then I would also underline the necessity to provide assistance for these households to facilitate the renovations, maybe in step-by-step renovations. And I would like to highlight an example of an NGO from Hungary, where I'm from, where in general housing supports are only accessible for households that have a proper job and have kids and they are married. So all those households that are not in the clean job market, or they are alone, or whatever other reasons, they are not accessing these funds, or they cannot put aside the price of the renovation ahead. They are just forgotten by these subsidies. So this NGO, to overcome this problem, is providing social assistance. They look into the situation of the family, they arrange all the administrative and debt-related issues, then they ask for the subsidy, they provide technicians that are trustable, and once the renovation is done, the subsidy goes to the NGO who pre-financed the renovation. So in this way, this fund can go to the next family, and the big issue of upfront costs and administrative problems is also tackled. But these kind of services shouldn't be on the shoulder of NGOs who has low capacities and cannot be present in every village where all the poor households are living. So it should be a public service. And also in France last week, I've seen that the French state is already seeing this as a public service, because they are developing this set of local councillors that help to address specifically these issues of families. But again, going back to the upfront cost, still is not an issue that is resolved. And finally, when we are talking at an EU level about these issues, it's easy to generalize, but we should really see that there are different realities across Europe. And while poverty is also present in Western Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe, in rural families, there are extreme poverty situations, heavy reliance on firewood heating and coal heating. And in these families, even replacing a stove, which costs like a few €100, is a problem that cannot be resolved by the families who is relying on subsidies, which were not increased in the last years, while Hungary was facing the highest food price inflation. And therefore, expecting them to go through the energy transition alone is, I think, too much expectation from these families. So we should really create community-based support schemes where an entire village is thinking of how we're gonna move away from polluting heating methods, how we're gonna provide renewable energy to our families, and how we're gonna make sure that the wind is not blowing through the houses, because we are able to exchange broken windows. So this should be a community-based support, and while currently there is a top-down mechanism, we should also turn it, as Benedetta said already, from the bottom to the up by creating community services for these households.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much for bringing this plurality of realities from the urban, from the rural, that sometimes some of these lived experiences have more space to participate in these mechanisms, which, if the buzzword right now in these all commission plans is about participation and inclusion, but there's still a big issue about social exclusion that needs to be tackled. And there is an opportunity to enact more of a bottom-up approach when we devise these plans, to give communities a little bit more sense of empowerment and being able to actually benefit the co-benefits or the core benefits, whatever we want to call them. But still, there is this underlying issue of inclusion that we need to tackle. And I guess financing, real targeted financing, is what you see as one of the priorities, as well as technical assistance. Technical assistance, not just for the middle class and the people who have means to access these spaces, but to bring this kind of information and technical assistance to these communities who are in the margins and are usually excluded from engaging in these processes. So thank you so much for bringing this to the table. And Eva, do you want to take the floor? What for you are the priorities and what gaps need to be addressed? I know we have a presentation from you.
Yes. But I mean, I can also already start because so my part of presentation might be boring because I will look into the details of the details of the details of the EPBD, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. But no, it's just to give you basically an idea of what we do have in our hands, how it can be used at national level, and actually what we can do with this new energy and housing portfolio, which we have been talking about so far. So we can move on. Well, a few words. I think the majority of you know Climate Action Network Europe. We are a coalition of NGOs working towards fighting climate change. So our 1.5 Paris Agreement goal is like the core of our work. And as you know, there's a lot of work to do towards that. We represent over 200 organizations in 39 countries in Europe, and specialties are energy, climate, and sustainable development policies. If you can move on the slides, please, that would be great. Again. Yes. So the first two slides, well, of course, to solve energy poverty, there's not only the PBD in place, although I've been working a lot on it, so I will start from here. I think it's important to say that the revision of this massive piece of legislation really give us the mandate to do more for our buildings, which have been lacking behind, as we know, towards, in the pathway towards the decarbonization of our economies and our society. This new directive, well, new revised directive, is not new. It has been going on since 2002. We have let's say, a new focus indeed, as the speakers before me, Anna, said before. There's a newly focused on worst performing buildings, so those buildings that really are the most polluting ones, where the most of energy poor households live and most vulnerable in general. So that was very great to see that out of the revision process, which was very challenging, very long, this focus has been kept. As you may know or not know, there are like new requirements within the PBD related to, let's say, trigger more renovations. On one hand, we have an approach for non-residential buildings that one might think, oh, well, it's only offices. But actually, within the non-residential segments, there are plenty of social purpose buildings that are very dear to our daily life, which, for example, are schools, hospitals, elderly homes, and so on and so shelters, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we have an approach for homes. So I think it's nice to see that for the non-residential sector, we have actually a requirement that says, okay, you member states, you tackle the worst performing buildings, you attach this regulatory tool, this minimum energy performance standards that says, by certain date, 2030, 2033, you need to improve it. You need to improve these buildings. And it's like individual, so building by building level. It's great and all, because of course non-residential might be a little bit easier to tackle than the residential. Although, as one thing that is missing, a gap, I would say, is the fact that there's a lot of flexibilities in exempting buildings, and we need to remind ourselves that, as I said before, it's not only a matter of offices, but they're also a matter of hospitals, schools, and so on and so forth, especially in the non-residential sector. Indeed, offices are the biggest segment, although the most energy-intensive one and the one with the higher occupancies is hospitals. So it's a non-negligible segment, to really renovate. So when it comes to the residential sector, it's a much more flexible approach, because now we talk about member states calculating trajectories, where they will see basically a progressive decrease in the average energy performance of homes. Although there is indeed a requirement that says out of these energy savings, because there are like different targets for energy savings out of this trajectory at different times, you need to make sure that 55% of these energy savings comes from the renovation of worst performing buildings, which can be chosen within a pool, a segment, a specific segment, which is 43% of the worst performing stock and residential national level stock. Great, although, as you can see, there's a very big leeway for member states to choose which kind of buildings go first, especially coming from a pool, this 43%, that it's pretty big, pretty wide, so it means that one member states could really focus on low-hanging fruits and just go for like the low-medium, let's say, energy performing homes, and actually leave behind those that really need it the most, so where probably, most likely, energy poor households really live. And again, for the renovations, minimum energy performance standards are not mandatory, and they're like part of a menu of things that member states can apply to trigger these renovations, which, I mean, again, it gives a lot of flexibility. Also, it's also very important to really, design technical assistance. You Maria were saying, I mean, the technical assistance, the absorption measures, the financing. I mean, these are very important things that need to happen for sure. Although accounting energy savings, like pure energy savings towards these measures, is really difficult, and sometimes we might miss, the impact on the lives of the people living in those buildings. We can move on to the next slides. Yes, so other 2 points coming from the PBD, but there are like plenty of others, but it's just for simplicity. I think, well, we already discussed the national building renovation plans in the session before. I think it's great that there's a focus again on most performing buildings, tackling energy poverty, having broader consultations, including CSOs, so civil society, especially those working with the most vulnerable segments of the society, and actually like a link that really shows like how the decarbonization of buildings really helps to contribute to the fulfillment of overarching targets like energy efficiency target or renewable energy targets and so on and so forth, which helps, creating a coherence within the legislative framework at EU level, then trickles down as well, at national level. Although from the missing pieces on this, I would say that, and this is something that we lost, unfortunately, in the revision process, was the the requirement for member states to really draw up a roadmap with targets, with quantifiable targets to really alleviate energy poverty. That could have been, of course, aligned with the targets for renovation of worst performing buildings, for example, which was unfortunate. We already said the consultations are fantastic, but we really need them to be transparent, inclusive, and so on and so forth. So a lot of work for us on national, for our members on national level to do, and also us in their help. And of course, there is a missing link with the social climate plans, as we were saying before with Javier, which is very important because, as we all know, there's the implementation of the ETS2, so the emission trading system covering greenhouse gas emission from buildings and road transport. And we really think that indeed, with the alignment of these two plans, that there's really the chance to really create like a coherent roadmap towards alleviating energy poverty in the building sector in a ambitious and socially just way. On the enabling framework, I think it goes very well with what Anna and Benedetta were saying before, so I'm not dwelling too much into this. I think it's great that the PBD has new requirements, although pretty flexible in a way that asks member state, hey, make sure that the disbursement of public money is made more, is made easier, it's more accessible, although there isn't really like the requirement of prioritize, the most vulnerable segments of the society when you disburse public money, which is a gap right underneath. Great with the creation of one-stop shops, although again, as it was said before, it would have been better to have like a more proactive role for one-stop shops to really, and also the type of competencies of the people working in these one-stop shops is not only a matter of energy, but energy poverty is such like an intersection of so many different factors, which having, for example, in this case, having someone with a social worker or a social type of study it would be better to really spot those structural problems and be more holistic in that way. And of course, indeed, it's good to see, requirements to really tackle barriers, removal of barriers, the possibility of application of social safeguards. But again, not mandatory enough, which again, it's a missing pieces there. We can go on. I think I will just really recap because I don't know how much I have left. Yeah, great, good. Because sometimes I go on and I speak and I lose myself in speaking. There's nothing new. For us, it's really important in the next phase, this European Affordable Housing Initiative, and attached to it, of course, the Pan-European Investment Platform, and to a certain extent, the housing construction strategy. Of course, these are other ones that are very important, as we already mentioned, but let's say that our direct engagement will be mainly on these three. I would say we can go on in the next slide, please. And throughout the mission letter of Dan Jorgensen, so the Energy and Housing Commissioner, which, by the way, I don't know if you know, but actually mission letter can be changed, and they uploaded a new one. So I advise you to take a look in case there's something, there's something new or something missing. No, I think it's very important to remind ourselves, especially coming from the hearings, that indeed, some construction will need to happen to tackle the problem of housing shortage. That's a given. And the need, though, for us to remember is that there's a difference between housing needs and housing demand, of course, and also like building more does not necessarily mean we are solving the housing crisis from one day to the other. And especially when we talk about energy poverty is tackled at the root cause, which is really looking at what we have standing and how we can improve it to the best way possible and with the best timelines possible, and so on and so forth. So for us, really, in a moment where there's a lot of let's say there's a lot of buy-in, with this new construction, let's say, way that, of course, it looks like a leverage, for more innovative solutions, competitiveness, technologies, and so on and so forth. It's fine. At the same time, I think there needs to be like a balanced approach within this overall, let's say, rolling out of these initiatives, especially when it comes to channeling investments, technical assistance, and so on and so forth, and make it, of course, inclusive. Renovation optimization, we also talked it before with the presentation of Comactivate. I mean, using, the optimization of the existing stock, for example, like repurposing vacant spaces, giving a new life to existing buildings can really, of course, having like big social and positive social impact, it has big positive impacts also on the environment because we, decrease the overall whole life cycle carbon emissions. We try to use like better, more environmentally friendly materials, or even reusing, materials, and so on and so forth. And so lowering, of course, like energy demand in a way. So looking at energy poverty really helps us to indeed lower energy bills, delivering healthier homes for people. It has, of course, like a good effect on economies. It creates new jobs and so on and so forth. And especially really helps us, to look towards like this very much, need to really fight against energy poverty. If we can go on, it's a last reflection slide. I have a lot to reflect. So we also need to, we need to remind ourselves, I kind of hinted a little bit, this like, this, how can I say, like this way of like seeing the housing construction, as a way to like to ensure like more competitiveness and so on and so forth for like industries. I think it's really important for us to keep us like people over profit very, very strong in our day-to-day work in what we do. And also when we talk about new constructions, it's very important to remind that we do have requirements for new constructions because the new construction that are going to come up today, they will be standing 15 plus years more. So it's also really important to really deliver, especially prioritizing the delivery of new affordable housing that needs to be like climate ambitious, climate compatible. So in line with the zero emission building standards. Again, very important to keep in mind the newly electrification, let's say, focus that has been given to with the mission letters and the new commission, I would say. So it's really like it's really an opportunity for buildings to really act as an infrastructure within the energy system. So really helping the balancing needs of the energy system and help like balancing also like the energy prices, which is very important. And last but definitely not least, that's here I highlighted very much is the fact that one big thing missing from the mission letter and the priority for this new mandate is the fact that there is no commitment for a 2040 energy efficiency target, which having a renewable energy target for 2040 is fantastic, but that won't mean too much without a demand reduction commitment for all the sectors, I mean, especially buildings, which is very polluting. So this is something that needs to be addressed in the next 4 or 5 years. Voilà, I think I would like to conclude with the last slide. So for me, the priorities, I mean, I think it's pretty much clear at this very moment that for me, I mean, I hope also you share my same idea, is the fact that within a new mandate with energy and housing, I think we need to do our best with what we have in our full mandate. So like trying to really implement the PBD, ED, RED, and so on and so forth in a way that is coherent and complementary. Of course, it's really important to address the synergies between the ETS2 and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, because one could act as a way of like mitigating, of course, the impact of the ETS2 on the most vulnerable segments of the society. Long-term planning, very important, that we highlighted. Financing, I mean, a lot of importance related to the disbursement of money, of course, aligning with conditionalities on social and environmental, aligning with social and environmental conditionalities, earmarking TA, support, and so on and so forth. And I want to conclude with a very important point, which is keep citizens at the center of the discussions, because we really need it. I mean, we really need we really need to create like spaces for citizens to really be part of the energy transition, because it's not a top-down process. It's really like rather like a bottom-up, because it's us, like as citizens that will people. Sorry, it's people that will have to really roll out the transition in the built environment in the other sectors. And with this, I finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva, for reinforcing a lot of what Anna said, but really getting into the nitty-gritty details of the policies and bridging everything together. Of course, you were in the negotiations of the EPBD, so you have a great understanding of how this connected. So thank you for shedding a light on that. I want to open the floor for questions, but first I would like to ask a question to the three of you, because you all touched upon the fact that participation is important, inclusivity, bottom-up processes versus top-down. And my question would be, how do we actually enact the bottom-up approach from here at the EU level? So the people, we are legislating from afar from where these things need to happen. So I was curious if you had any reflections, how can we actually do this? Maybe reflecting on your role as NGOs in this, in the role of the parliament with your constituencies. I would be very curious, because for me, it's also a very existential question. We are very far removed from where we need to make an impact. So how are we sure, can you make sure that these stories are heard, that the policymakers here are aware of the realities and this conflicting realities that we need to realign to make this policy-making process a bit better? A very long question and complicated question, so I don't know who wants to go first. And then if there's already questions, you can always.
I can try, but if I had the perfect answer to this question, I think I would have solved a lot of problems. So this is a huge issue in the European scenario, because that is the actual problem of Europe. You know, what we always say is too far away, it's too far apart. So we need to do everything that is possible to make it closer to the people, closer on from the local level. So from a political point of view, first is the way we actually create the legislation. So what the legislation is stating and how these processes are made. Because if European legislation will start asking for proper engagement, because now there's some directive that asking for engagement, but then the implementation on the local level is very mild, because the actual legislation is not explaining what engagement means, it's not making mandatory, is not going into more detail, and then the national legislator is just like, yeah, we had that, mayor, it's fine. So that is not actual engagement. So first is making the processes within the legislation. Second is to really implement the multi-level governance that the EU should be based on. That means that we need to engage local communities, from local authorities to local representatives within the lawmaking process, the legislation making process, and then in the implementation process. So from both the Commission side when they are creating the law, from the Parliament side when we are discussing it, and from the Commission side again when they are implementing it. So that should be constant, and that should be really also approach in the European institutions. Like we have the Committee of the Regions, for example, which is that we have it, but we're not really using the Committee of the Regions as we should be using it. And there's like in the Committee of the Regions, there are even like municipality councillor, so like people that are representing like 100,000 people, and they could really get this to that and that to this. They could do this kind of like operation, but we're not really making our institutions talk to each other and give a sense to many of the things that we're doing. So have this kind of process internalized for the lawmaking process and the implementation implementation phases. So to have this kind of constant dialogue, and then. As a member of parliament, I think we do have a strong role to play on the local level. For example, I decided to go back and forward, which is extremely stressful and also extremely polluting. But it's a way for me to be there as much as possible, although it's really, really short, small time. But we should try to make these processes to hear the people that are working on this, that are impacting on from what we are discussing on in the European Parliament, to hear from there and take it to the Parliament, to make their voices heard, and then to give that to give back what we're doing, because a lot of people don't even know what we're doing. So this is the kind of thing. And then to explain and to be willing to implement the engagement processes that should be in the legislation. Because there's so many times, we know with the new I only can come to with the name in Italian, PNRR. Anyway, the European legislation, the new Europe, okay, funding, for example, they ask for LRF. They ask for. Sorry, I only had the other acronym. They ask for the. It's good that you always have an Italian in Brussels. They ask for engagement, and then a lot of these projects they were made and decided with no engagement. And this is also the role of the MEP. We need to denounce that. We need to say this thing that didn't do the engagement. We want to be, we want the Commission to look over that and to actually do the actual engagement process. Because if you leave that to some regional authorities and stuff, that is not for sure that they will implement it, and then we say, there's no engagement. So there's a lot of things that we can do in that terms. Sorry, I went very long.
No, it's okay. It's really good to hear this passionate call for the MEPs to be more engaged with the local level, and I would go so far as to also challenge to bring more of these lived experiences here in the bubble, to bring these people over to actually engage more in this multi-level dialogue, but not just the people who already are in these spaces, but actually the most vulnerable, the marginalized communities, I think, because they also need a space to be heard. Anyway, 2 cents. I don't know if any of you want to react, or we should move to questions to the audience. Yeah, I think we can move to questions from the audience.
Hi, good morning. I'm João Pedro Gouveia, researcher at Nova University of Lisbon in Portugal, and also the scientific coordinator of the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub for DG Energy. I have a reflection based on what you were saying, because on the latest years, we had a lot of discussion around policy implementation. People were getting excuses, member states, local governments, because there was no energy poverty definition, there was no frameworks for action. And I think the next 4 years maybe are really up for grabs. We now need to act. There is no excuse. There is already all the policy framework we have at hand. But then when we are looking to what Eva mentioned, what you mentioned as well, Benedetta, we are struggling on the ground, because we see the money coming from the Recovery and Resilience Plan, the funding schemes available for energy efficiency. they are terrible. Like like the action, we see that, and I've been supporting the Portuguese government on this as well. We've evaluated over 100,000 submissions of citizens. 2% is insulation. 2%. So the best scheme ever on energy efficiency, it's only 2% is for insulation. So we have all the frameworks. But then we try to implement things, the transaction costs are massive. And we are only talking about, I would say, the average citizen. So we are not even reaching the average person. So the struggle to get the energy poor, the most vulnerable consumers, is even higher. And what we see on the ground is a lack of success on all of that. So I think we are a lot on the theoretical ground of things. We need to engage more people. And then I think there is a problem there, because we assume, I think, above all on energy, on buildings, we assume that anyone wants to be an energy expert, wants to be really involved. I don't think so. I think, and I work on energy for the last 20 years and buildings. So I think people want their problem solved. They want cheaper energy bills. They want a comfortable house. They want to live well in the summer, in the winter. So, and this idea, and I've been on the ground with multiple projects, both at EU level and especially in Portugal, and it's very difficult to engage citizens. This idea of engaging people, like we started an energy community. That's fine to get 15 people. The people really interested on something on a local level, but then the rest, right? So we hear a lot here today, yesterday, the Commission says that renewable energy communities. I don't feel that renewable energy communities will be really super helpful at a massive scale at European level. Not in general, but also for the energy poor. It will be a niche, unfortunately. Then the renovation. We see the reports, the regular reports from the long-term renovation strategies of the countries. I closely follow the Portuguese one. Each semester, we're failing this, failing that, no data, no funding. So we have a nice policy framework for 2030, 2040, 2050, but then that's it. Also, on public consultation. So Portugal released the energy poverty strategy in the beginning of the year. My team at the university, we made 2 massive reports on public consultation. We never get a reply. That's mandatory. So we are talking about the basics. I'm just highlighting a few things. So renovation is failing, energy communities and the inclusion of vulnerable cities is failing, but also broad renewable energy communities. I supported setting up one energy committee of 15 members. It took us over 1 year to do this. 15, like 14 panels, it's nothing, right? So we are struggling on every front of what we are saying. And then we have the regulation in place, but things are failing on the basics. So just that, thank you. No specific questions, just a reflection.
Yeah, I'll be very fast. Also because I already spoke. Yes, I think the reality checks are good. Again, I come from Italy. So I think 1 week ago or so, I went speaking at the first conference in Italian. Also, like speaking about the PPD in Italian is a challenge in itself, but in general, also with an audience that normally it's like, because I was mainly speaking to like industry and energy efficiency, so like people, so actually, a stakeholder that would see a benefit, I mean, not only for societal benefits, but, in the revenue wise. It's difficult because like when you deal with a country that has like a public opinion that is pretty much like skewed towards, oh no, this directive is not for us, it's too bad, it's whatever, we're not going to implement it. So much that the fact that now the budget law maybe has subsidies for gas boilers again. So again, still. So yes, I think it is good to address the fact that we have a big problem. At the same time, I really feel that even if the overall political environment is not the greatest for progressivism, especially in environmental topics, I think as NGOs like civil society on the ground have the grip to really help people understanding like what they're missing on, because they're missing on. I mean, for the ones that can, because of course the ones that are locked out, it's difficult for them to access the market. Although at the same time, I really feel that the raising awareness, it needs to be like leveled up substantially. So more resources needs to be given, to NGOs like civil society on the ground to really help, because sometimes what happens is that we are under-resourced, understaffed, and it's very difficult for us to indeed like address the issues, which is gigantic. So I think also like the interlinkage between the civil society organizations, so the representatives and the local authorities, sometimes is not really there, and I think it's something that needs to really like be fortified even more, especially in those countries where unfortunately public opinion goes against, energy renovation of buildings, but any type of energy transition, let's say, action. So I think we do have a really big role to play, although there are some things that need to change in the way that we get resourced and we are organized, and the way that we mobilize as well. I think we really need to widen up the scope. So social and environmental NGOs and all the vulnerable, all the representative of vulnerable segments, I think they really need to like cluster up and really like try to deblock this impasse. Not an answer, but voila, a reflection back to you. Thank you.
Okay, hello, I'm Frank from Counterbalance. We are a European network of NGOs working on public investment, mostly the European Investment Bank, EIB. Thanks a lot for doing these panels, because it's very interesting for us. I had a question first for Benedetta, but also others can maybe answer this, because you talked about the financialization, which I find really interesting. In this context, because we now have like there will be this, I forgot the name already, the affordable housing investment platform, pan-European, with the collaboration with Commission and EIB that's being prepared. And you see in the what's being said about it that for them they look a lot at private sector, and you also see it in the EIB's new strategic roadmap that was approved in June, so a little bit before the new commission. You see this line. And while on the one hand we really want to work on this, it's a bit relative new sector. That's why I'm really happy to see all these presentations to know a bit more about it. But from you from the Green, that you work so much on this topic, how do you feel about this? That on the one hand, affordable housing became a big priority. The investment also, the public investment need, they want to increase it. And they also want to work together with the social housing companies and the local government, etc., which is really great, I think. But this role of the private investors, I'm concerned about this. And when I had meetings with EIB about this, I found their response, they were kind of dodging the questions. And I think it's important that we mobilize on this issue, because in the worst case, the public investment for affordable housing will feed the financialization, which I obviously hope will not happen, and we can overcome this. So yeah, that's a question a bit to you, if you also look into this, and then maybe like a call that I also share with others. I think it would be really good to develop a kind of common position on what we want this housing financing platform to do, and which are our social and environmental criteria for it.
Thank you. I go? Yeah. Sorry, I took the floor. We have the exact same fear that if you, of course, we need investments, and with public investments are not going to be enough, and we know that. So we need to couple them with private investments in our housing as well. But then private investments at the moment, when they are, because basically with private investments, what the public does is like gives a share of it, and then you can build or renovate buildings and stuff. And then on that, for me, the key word to avoid financialization is that meaning of affordability. Because if affordability means 10% that's the market price, then you get into financialization. Because basically you put in public money on something that is not social. It's just like for rich people that are a bit less rich than the richest one. So you're not solving the problem, you're not doing anything. And unfortunately, this is already happening in some parts of Europe, where private funds are getting public money for doing something that is completely unaffordable. We have cases like of student dorms, where instead of paying a room in a student dorm 1,000 euros, you pay 850. But who's the student that can afford 850? You know, and that is again is the same thing. And this comes with public money, and this is also put into the statistics for social housing. You know, like not social housing, but like public conventioned housing. So you go up in the statistics, but this housing is not any social, is not lowering the prices, is not answering to the problem, but is actually making the financialization problem even stronger. So for me, and this is also something that we've been looking a lot as Greens into the word affordability, because in the whole letter we only see affordability here, affordability there, but no one explains what affordability means compared to who and for whom, and this is what we want to work on. In the parliament, with them for the commissioner, to avoid that we put public money into financialization of housing or any way not solving the issue and giving even more possibility and making the funds even bigger and more wealthy. So.
Two.
Thank you for a great presentation. I think you've helped me focus myself on this issue. And so from a selfish, personal position, you've done a great job. And all of you have helped focus me. But I'm going to actually pick up on Bernadetta and also on Frank. The combination of the two was very, very useful. For me, you know, the last point you raised, Bernadetta, about affordability. I despise that word, affordability. I have heard it for 20 years at least in the United Kingdom, whatever the United Kingdom is, you know. It doesn't really have a meaning. It's one of these horrible words, like a word I was talking about earlier on this morning with some people about the word activist. We cannot, you see the word activist everywhere, you see the word affordability everywhere. But what is an activist? What is a human being? What is, and Frank mentioned financialization. You know, right. The financialization of the markets is at the heart of the problem. And when Bernadetta, I'm going to come to a question very quickly, by the way. Right. And the whole world is increasingly financialized. The house, as Bernadetta so aptly put, is for someone to live in, not a commodity, not an asset. It's primarily somewhere to survive, to be warm, to be fed, to be safe. And that is not what is happening, right? So how do we... So the question, and so many great points have been made by you people. Citizen, what, you know, it was Eva, wasn't it? Eva said citizen and then changed the word to people. You know, so important. What is a citizen? What is a person? What is a denizen? That horrible word denizen. The first time I saw the word denizen was about 15 years ago. I didn't even know what the hell it meant because it was one of these newfangled words that doesn't really solve a problem. Or what is a human non-entity? And when it comes to housing, we need to find homes on a European scale, on a global scale, homes for everyone to live in. Is it 18 million homes in the earlier session this morning? Empty, is it 18 million across Europe, empty? You know? And also another great point you all made was, we don't need new builds. We need refurbishment. We need renovation. You know, inbuilt obsolescence is this terrible problem that psychologists, maybe social scientists, made us so aware of in the 1950s, I think it was, or was it the 60s? We don't want a world of inbuilt obsolescence that actually serves the richest. So the question I'm going to ask is, how do we disrupt financialization of housing and energy markets for the sake of all, so that I'm going to just, unfortunately, slightly be irregular and say, let's, as a starting point, look after the vulnerable and give everybody a home. We can easily do that without disturbing the greed of the markets. Thank you.
If possible, in one short sentence. I know it's a very, very big question, but we also need to wrap it up.
Not making it convenient. Something is financialized just if it makes profit. If we make a process that doesn't make profit, so if rent is not so high, because with all the measures we said, we can lower the rent, and that's the final aim, then it's not profitable anymore, then it's not financialized, because the financialization is rising because rents are rising, so they are more convenient than stocks. But if that is not the case anymore, because we bring it down with making more social housing, with renovating the old buildings, with this and that, we're making like rental control and these kinds of measures, where rental control could or not work, that's to be seen. But then if you manage to put the rent down, then financialization, it will not happen because there's nothing to financialize, because it's not also like with taxing all the empty buildings much more, if they're not in the middle of the countryside, of course, but in the middle of the city, and they're owned by a private fund, you tax it so much, it's not convenient and profitable to have it empty. They will sell it or they will rent it for lower prices. So if we manage to put the rents down, and to not have empty buildings in very crowded places, then financialization will not be convenient, and then you stop it.
I don't know. Do you want to go? Wow, very difficult, because it's a very, very, very good question. Without repeating what Benedetta rightly said now, I think there is a reason that also at your level we are looking at things happening, in the housing market, like for example, short-term rentals. Like there is like an alarm bell over there that needs to be rang. Although, I think it will not solve it in itself the problem of financialization. Although, like tackling like one of the, I think, biggest and most current, like housing inefficiency, at the moment, that has shortened the housing availability, especially in some capitals. In some country, even like Portugal, I've lived in Lisbon for like 2 years, and it's very bad there. It's something that indeed it's like a step forward. Is it going to be a solution? Probably not, but at least I think we are moving in. I would hope that we're moving in the right direction towards that. Thank you.
30 seconds.
Okay. So I'm not an expert of housing finance, so I don't have the solutions for it. But from what I've seen, I think regulation is important, both on the market and also at a lower level, like in municipalities, on vacancy and on the taxation of short-term rental, long-term rental, and rent regulation. But I don't have a magic solution for it in one sentence.
That's okay. I know it was an impossible challenge, but thank you so much for sticking around, and thank you so much for our panelists. It was really great. A round of applause for them while we close. Before we go, we take a picture outside, if that's okay, and you can run. It's okay. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for coming.